It's very nice to be back here. I think I was with you a couple of years ago talking about poverty reduction, and today about taxes, everyone's favorite subject. And I know you've just been relaxing the last couple of days with nothing big to talk about, and I know that's not true. And I want to say thank you for making time to let me come and share some of the tax research that we're doing. And I think you've made that call because you know that ultimately at the core of what you're trying to do and all of our efforts to restore public services and quality public services and to bring in new public services is the question of revenues, is the question of taxes. And we're now in this critical moment with an election coming in May where we have this little opening to shift the conversation about taxes. And in anticipation of that, we at the CCPA a couple of years ago pulled together a table of our allies and folks who wanted to try to shift the conversation on taxes. And you guys came to that table. Larry Keane sits at that table. And we all anteed in together to pay for some really deep public opinion research on taxes that I'm going to share with you right now. And then I'm also, as Jim said, going to give you a little sneak peek of some other research to share with you. I think I'm so glad to be here right now with that little window that we have. I want to emphasize this point. In the next month or so, political parties will be finalizing their platforms. And where they land on the question of taxes will determine the fiscal room that is available to do just about anything and everything that we would hope over the next 4 years. I'm hoping in the next half an hour to equip you with some very useful bits of information and options so that you can go back to your home communities and engage the parties and your colleagues and the media and try to create as much political space as possible to increase that fiscal room. So I'm going to walk you through very quickly why we need tax reform. Then I'll share with you this opinion research that you guys helped to fund. And then I'll walk you through this options for how to raise new revenues that we're releasing on Tuesday, and then we'll take it from there. Here's the context. We at the CCPA, we like to talk about how, big picture, we need to tackle the challenge that comes from the two great inconvenient truths of our time: climate change and growing inequality. Because if we're actually going to tackle those problems, it's going to take more money. And it's going to take more money to maintain, let alone improve and enhance our existing public services. But here's the problem. A decade plus of tax cuts have meant that provincial revenues in British Columbia have shrunk by 1.6% of the economy, of GDP, which doesn't sound like much. But 1.6% of GDP represents $3.5 billion, which means if we taxed in British Columbia today at the same level that we taxed in the year 2000, the provincial treasury would be $3.5 billion richer than it is today. Now, we're being bombarded right now with these ads telling us about how, wait, we have the lowest taxes in the country. This is true, and it's nothing to boast about. We're paying a heavy price, and we've nothing to show for it. So you can see the blue line here is BC, and we used to kind of track the average in terms of the overall level of taxes. And then after the Campbell tax cuts, we dropped well below the average. And so now we're well below the average, and we asked ourselves in this study, how much more money would the province have if instead of boasting about being the lowest taxes, what if we were just average? That's the answer. The provincial treasury would be $2.4 billion richer than it is today if we were just average. But we've also seen these incredible shifts in who's paying what taxes. And so this is from a study we did a year or so ago where we looked at all the taxes, the personal taxes British Columbians pay. Income taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, MSP premiums, all of that rolled together. And we have this really great database at the office of all these tens of thousands of tax filer data that lets us say, like, who pays how. We can really geek out on this stuff, okay? And what you see in the chart goes from the poorest 10% of households in BC, the next 10%, the next 10%, all the way up to the richest 1%. I just want this chart to sink in, because it didn't used to look like this 10 years ago. It used to be kind of flat, and then it was a little progressive at the top, meaning as for the very wealthy, they were paying a little bit more. Now, income taxes are progressive, meaning wealthier people pay more as a share of their income. But all those other taxes I mentioned aren't progressive, and they hit modest and middle-income families harder. The impact of all of that is in that chart for you. This is the BC tax system. Put very simply, the more you make in this province, the lower your overall tax rate. And when British Columbians learn this, it doesn't sit well with them. And this captures some of the shifts that have led to that. So the blue bars are the year 2000, and the red bars are last year. And it's where BC's taxes are coming from different kinds of taxes over that 10-year period. And what you see is that with all the income tax cuts, the province has seen a drop in about of a third how much money is coming from the progressive income tax. So much so that the province now collects about as much from income tax as it does from sales taxes. Notice, too, the increase in MSP premiums and the fact that the province now collects more in MSP premiums than it does from corporate income taxes. That's the BC tax system, too. So we've seen these shifts from where, within the tax system, from corporations to households, from upper-income households to middle and modest-income households, and from progressive income taxes to regressive consumption taxes and MSP premiums and user fees. That's the context in which we're trying to engage British Columbians. And so the question is, where do we go with that? How do we raise taxes in a way that undoes that regressivity, makes the system fair again, where everyone pays their fair share? And how do we talk about this with British Columbians in a way that works for them when so many of them are struggling to make ends meet? Because we know that too. So here's the opinion research I want to share with you. This was led by Shannon Dobb, who couldn't be with me today. And she worked with Environics in the summer doing an online poll of over 1,000 British Columbians, and then she and her researcher, co-researcher, led focus groups in nine focus groups in 3 cities around the province. And here's what we found. So first of all, when we asked people, should there be an increase in taxes for income taxes, and if so, at what level of income, it just sort of mounts. But once you get to $100,000, a clear majority of British Columbians say they should pay more. And overall, only about 10% of British Columbians don't think there should be any increases. There's clearly a strong willingness to see increases in taxes at the high end. What about corporations? 67% say corporations pay less than they should. Of those, 44% actually say much less than they should. And here's an interesting piece, too, because this was true across the opinion research. We went into this thinking that taxes were like this political wedge issue, right? Turns out not so much. These are people who indicated they were liberal or conservative voters. And they, too, thought corporations were undertaxed significantly. Now, when you just drive by poll people and you say, do you think you pay too much or too little in taxes, not surprisingly, 70%, 71% say they pay a bit too much in taxes. But here's where it starts to get interesting. They also agree that taxes are the price for the quality of life that we have in Canada. And now let me walk you through this one. Because it was an online poll, we could do something really neat. In the upper part, this was a screen that the people had on their computers. And in the upper part, we tried to put in concrete dollar terms what tax increases would mean. Because right now, you tell people, well, 10% increase, 20%, people don't know what that means. So we said, well, a 0.1% increase in your taxes if you made $40,000 would be $200. If you made $80,000, it would be $400. if it was a 1% increase. So this was in front of people, right? So they could see concretely what this meant in terms of dollars. And then in the blue boxes, 11 random options came before them of different policy choices, and it asked them not, because before I showed you that most people, it's a no-brainer asking people to increase taxes on the wealthy. That's fine. But now we're not asking about other people paying more. Now we're asking them about whether they themselves would be willing to pay more for a whole bunch of policy changes. And here's what it all looked like. 69%, most popular one, said they would pay more to improve community-based services for seniors, home care and things like that. You'll notice majority support for reducing class sizes in K-12. Not just that they're saying yes to that, they're saying they themselves would pay more to see that happen. Similarly, look at the welfare one, right? So it's not just that a majority are saying, yes, there should be increases in welfare. They're saying, I would pay more myself to see that happen. And even items like that rank a bit lower, but still close to half, like reducing post-secondary tuition or bringing in the $10 a day childcare plan, those are policies that you would think, we think of as sort of point-in-life policies, right? You only directly benefit at a particular stage in your life. And yet there, too, almost half the people were saying, yeah, I would pay more for that myself. Now, you might wonder, when you look at something like that, does that mean there's like 30% of the people who are going no, 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 no to everything? Turns out there isn't. It turns out only a little more than 100 of the 1,000 said no to everything. Most people were spread between 1 and, interestingly, many of them saying yes to all 11 of those policies. And when you break it out a little bit more, so that was, on average, they were saying yes to almost 6 of them. And if you group it a little differently, you see only 12% said no to any, no, they wouldn't pay more for any of that. Whereas well over a healthy majority were willing to pay for 4 or more. 1 in 5 were willing to pay for all of them. And again, you think, well, is this just, the NDP's voting one way and the Greens voting with them and then the Liberals and Conservatives? Well, look at this. Here's the Greens, here's the NDP, here's the Liberal, here's the Conservative, there's the medium. You know what? It's not so different. In fact, we tested for a whole bunch of demographic differences and found nothing statistically significant except for this. And I didn't expect this either. That younger people were 2 times more likely to say they themselves would pay more. That's pretty neat. But there's caveats in all of this. In the focus groups, this came up in particular. You know, we're on the other hand, there's this deep mistrust of government that's toxic. People feel like there's just corruption and inefficiency and waste. And unfortunately, people have a grossly inflated sense of how much waste there is. You know, billions of dollars if they just cut down on waste, which isn't true. So the challenge for us is to move from thinking about taxes as me to the government to that circle connected back to services. Just a few lesson recaps for us out of the poll. Really, increasing taxes on 100,000 and up ought to be a no-brainer. And I think that's where we need to try to pull the parties. Strong support across party lines. And a willingness to pay more themselves, provided it's linked to services and under conditions of transparency. But in particular, I want to just highlight a few themes that came out of it for us that we need to try to animate. The notion of responsibility, everyone pitching in their fair share, and fairness there. And the transparency, the quality of life across generations, kind of a new social deal where we improve services for seniors and young families. And the game changer is participation. Watching those focus groups. When people get a chance to engage and deliberate together, their answers change. Right? Which is a lesson out of where we might want to go with participation or participatory budgeting or that kind of thing. All right, that's some of the opinion research. So let me show you now what we're going to release on Tuesday as a few options for how we could raise new revenues. And the first set of options are around personal income taxes. And before I walk you through any scenarios, let me just remind you what our existing provincial income tax system is. We have 5 income tax brackets. And you can see that for all 5 of those brackets, we've seen large tax cuts, mostly dating from Campbell's first days in office. Okay? Our top marginal tax rate's now the 4th lowest in the country. And one of the challenges, people don't understand how tax brackets work, right? So if you make over $103,000, you're in the 5th bracket. But that doesn't mean you pay 14.7% on all your income. It just means you pay 14.7% on your income over $103,000. And you pay those lower rates on all your earlier income. That's how taxes work. Now, who pays at those levels? Well, in BC, almost 60% of BCers only pay the first tax bracket because their income's less than $37,000 a year. The next group is in the next bracket, and so on. So only about 5.5% of British Columbians pay the top bracket, meaning only 5.5% of British Columbians make more than $100,000 a year. Okay, this is our starting point. So where do we go with that? Now I'm going to quickly walk you through some scenarios. Don't try to remember it all. All I'm trying to show you is that the scope of possibilities are endless, really. There's tons of options. And I'm going to link it to the kinds of things that you could pay for if we did these things. Not saying this is what we should do. I'm just trying to give you a sense of what's possible, okay? So here's one scenario. What if we took that top tax bracket and increased it from 14.7% to 17%, still well below where it was 10 years ago? Only the top 5.5% of British Columbians would be impacted. You would raise $375 million, which is enough to increase welfare rates by $200 to $400 per month after being frozen for 6 years. Now, what if you brought in 2 upper income brackets, 2 new upper income brackets? Excuse me, this one's just one. A new upper income bracket at $150,000 a year. Now only the top 2% of British Columbians would be impacted. You'd raise $400 million a year. You know what you can do with $400 million a year? You could build 2,000 units of social housing a year. It's been a long time since we did that. Scenario 3, now bring in 2 new upper income brackets at $150,000 and $200,000. Once you hit $200,000, now we're the top 1% that Occupy told us about, okay? Now you'd raise $700 million. So now you could do the social housing and you could restore class sizes and composition and specialist teacher levels to where they were 5 years ago. Here's another scenario. Increase the 5th bracket, as I showed you before, to 17%, and bring in the 2 upper income brackets. So now we're affecting the top 5.5. Now there's 930 million. Now you can do what I just mentioned, and you could increase post-secondary funding by 10%. Here's another scenario. 2 new brackets, but now I'm being a bit more bold. I'm saying increase all 3 of the top 3 brackets. Now still, only 14% of British Columbians would be affected because only 14% make more than $70,000. Now you've passed the 1 billion mark. And now you could also bring in the first phase of the implementing the comprehensive $10 a day publicly funded childcare plan. Here's another option. Ontario has these 2 upper income surtaxes. So we said, well, what would it look like if we just had the same surtaxes as them? Basically, we modeled it on them, same threshold, same top marginal tax rate. We're over $1 billion if we do that. They do it. Why can't we do it? All right, one more scenario. Okay, now you're going to think I'm crazy. 20% increase to all tax brackets and the upper 20. So now you're thinking Seth has gone off the deep end if you were to propose something like that. There's a few math teachers in the room. I have a quiz for you. I showed you earlier what the first tax bracket was. In fact, the vast majority of British Columbians, after deductions and so on, right up to like $90,000 a year, the vast majority of British Columbians have a total income tax bill of less than 5% of their income, provincial income tax. What's 20% of 5%? 1%. 1%. Sounds different from 20%, doesn't it? Maybe people won't set their hair on fire. But if you did that, now we've got $2.3 billion. And with that, you could do the social housing and the welfare increase and restore their class sizes and specialist teacher levels and the first phase of childcare and needed investments in community health care for seniors and MCFD and post-secondary increases and environmental protection. Here's another option. I'm leaving income taxes now. I'm going to go to the controversial subject of the carbon tax. The carbon tax is now $30 a ton. It maxed out this summer. That was its last scheduled increase. What if we continued with $5 a year annual increases? That's how they've been increasing every year the last 4 years. 4 years from now, it would raise $2.2 billion, twice what it does now. But Mark Lee, our senior economist, has modeled if you take half that money and use it to actually get the damn job done, spending it on climate things, and the other half to enhance the credit, kind of modeled on the child tax benefit, so that 80% of families got some of it. But in fact, when he models this, the bottom half of households in BC would be net beneficiaries, meaning they would get more in the credit than they pay in the carbon tax. But it raises a lot new money. The paper that we're releasing on Tuesday has a whole bunch of other options that you can wade through, like closing tax loopholes and deductions. Let me just give you one example. Take the RSP. This is the one that drives me crazy. The RSP is the most inequitable social program in Canada. It by far and away is used by the wealthiest in Canada. It costs the federal treasury $10 billion a year in foregone revenues. You could almost eliminate poverty for that. But here's the kicker. Our BC taxes are assessed after you calculate your federal taxable income. So the RSP program costs the BC Treasury almost $500 million in lost revenues. So, we're kicking around an idea, like what if you had a minimum tax or lowered the ceiling? The ceiling right now for the RSP is over $22,000 a year in contributions. Like, who the heck has $22,000 a year? $22,000 a year is more than a minimum wage worker makes in an entire year. So you could lower the ceiling. What about reforming the homeowners grant so that it actually went to the households that actually needed it? Increasing corporate taxes. Each 1% increase would raise another $200 million. Resource royalties, forestry, water, and natural gas. Now, we keep hearing every time there's a quarterly update, Mike DeYoung keeps telling you all how there's no more money because natural gas royalties have collapsed, right? Have you heard that? Okay, but did you know that last year production of natural gas was at a record level? This is our shared resource. And it's a finite greenhouse gas. But the royalty regime is tied to the price, which has collapsed. So we are producing record amounts of it, and we are giving it away right now. So we need to review the whole royalty regime. And there's lots of money to be had there. Luxury taxes, vehicle taxes. I'm just putting it out there, people. But that too, according to a recent study that some SFU and UBC folks just put out, okay, don't get excited and all giddy. This is serious. If we did it, that too could be $500 million of income a year. So where do we go from here? And I'll just open it up to question and answer now. This is the end of the slides. Our political leaders need to hear from us now, right now, this month, before they cross the T's and dot the I's on the platform. They need to hear from us that we think there are lots of options out there, to give them social license to be a little more bold than they may be inclined to be right now, because they know that the appetite is there. Ultimately, one of the things that we've been talking about, though, is, there's whatever gets run on for this election, but really, when you look at the kind of information that I've just been sharing with you, I think the BC public deserves a chance to really have a deep and meaningful conversation about taxes. Something big, like the Citizens' Assembly on electoral reform or the conversation on health, where we all get to deliberate together and we get to answer a very fundamental question. What are the things that we want to pay for together? And how do we want to raise the money? Thanks.